since we're having a group show with 10 people, I wanted to do some larger works, but I wanted to not sort of crowd other people out. And so my first inclination was to seek out nooks or niches or, you know, spaces that are not usually inhabited, that wouldn't be in people's way, and that like this idea of sort of parasitic architecture or a camouflage sort of construct.
I think in a sexual way, there is that difference. I think sometimes the sensual work is men respond to quickly, but overall, it's well received by both. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the mergence between industry and nature, and I'm just interested in putting those together. And more the mud. Each piece that I use has some sort of symbolic connection. So the mud is this like creation element, like we came from the mud. And the cotton gin is a machine that I looked at when making this, and just the history behind the cotton gin, not even just like the creation of the machine by Eli Whitney, but like the people that worked in the fields, the war that came from it. I mean, there's just so much behind it, behind the material, and how it like kind of that's almost like the cloth that keeps us together, you know, it clothes us, it keeps us from being naked. So that's what I've been thinking about, I guess.
What I like to do is I'll be inspired by symbols from, you know, what I see, symbols from vintage textiles, symbols from things that I pick up from magazines, even scan codes that you supposedly scan into your phone. Those are the patterns from those scan codes even are some inspirations for some of my prints, not necessarily the ones up here, but for other prints. And I'll incorporate them in a dynamic landscape. It's more like just a movement in this space, and I'm dealing with the symbols, movement, and color.
Most of my work is based on site-specific areas, usually transitional areas that I'm investigating. In this case, the works that I have up are actually along the ridge in the Arkwright Hills outside of Fredonia where I live, so it's local, which is, I guess, a new thing for me to do something actually more locally. And there is a proposed wind farm going in, and which has been delayed now for several years. It's called New Grange. It's by Horizons. And I guess to me, what becomes really interesting is that, of course, it's very controversial. First of all, the wind energy is being touted as the new green energy, but we really don't always consider the effects that it has on the landscape.
She's a sorceress who's surrounded by animals. She's on an island and surrounded by animals, and the animals she's surrounded by are actually men that she's turned into these creatures who fawn over her. And I like this idea of this innocent young girl who could also exist as temptress without necessarily realizing that she had that power.
Yeah. So it's about maturation as a young woman. Do you see that as losing innocence of sorts, or?
No, not necessarily at all, because I think what really is fascinating to me about adolescence is that it's sort of a time of learning and it's a time of trying things out. So she's not necessarily at all aware of her powers.
Okay.
So, I mean, she's just sort of, looking up at the viewer, and it's whatever personal baggage we bring to it, because on one level, she's sort of staring you down, and on another level, she's sort of seducing you. And what I really love about this painting in particular is that she watches you and she follows you across the room. She sort of haunts you. And I'm really attracted to, that's how I'm attracted to images. If there's something that just sort of haunts me so much that that experience has to be painted, that sort of helps me decide, you know, what imagery I'm going to be working with.
My paintings are expressionistic. I work from the heart, the emotion, and they are conversation that a record of the conversation I have in my head while I'm creating the piece. So it changes moment to moment, and my paintings are like a conversation with my best friend, not just any friend. I say what I want, I stutter, I interrupt, I forget, I repeat, and that's exactly what happens in my paintings. I take out, subtract, and the most important thing is it's all about feeling safe in a place where I can express myself with no judgments made. And your best friend doesn't judge you, they just listen.
Right, well, my work is Watermarks. It's a continuing series that I have. I'm very drawn to taking photographs of water and surfaces that reflect things that, you know, are there but not physically not there. And so this particular series is from San Francisco, the 3 that are behind me now. Just sand, water from the air, from the shoreline. I find sort of a peaceful movement in taking pictures of water. I think it's things that people ignore, and yet they're right in front of us.
Well, this body of work is a bit of a departure for me. Instead of collage, which I usually do, I've incorporated a lot of different materials, but they all start from a found object of sorts. This one, a poster of the New York City landscape with the World Trade Towers painted over and replaced by a new museum called the Canyon Museum. But they're all, this body of work, what it really has to do with for me is personalization of more mass-produced objects. Not so much my own personalization of them, but the act of people personalizing objects and moments and how we can use them to create our own identity.
I think simply as a working artist, when I look at a house, it never strikes me to make it move in any way, because it's a house, you know, and it's just solid structure and it's just there, it's not moving anywhere. But a person, in real life, people are always moving all the time, and you know, Picasso obviously picked up on that, was showing the figure from 2 or 3 or 4 different angles, and I think a lot of that had to do with motion, because people are always moving and we see people, you know, from all different angles, and it can happen like that, you know. Whereas the house doesn't really move around too much. So I think houses and landscapes, I tend to be more conservative, and then when I put the figures in, there's a tendency to try to capture that kind of you know, movement and life, I suppose, that a person actually has.